All right, good morning, everyone.
Good
morning, everyone.
Hey.
Good morning, good morning. I'm Keith Brooks from the Education Department, but I'm here as a faculty development representative, and welcome to Prime Time at the BU Library. Prime Time at the BU Library's mission is to encourage lifelong learning beyond the classroom for faculty, students, and staff through its presentations, which are a collaboration of many different offices on campus with the Friends of the BU Library. Be sure to join us on next Tuesday, February 15th, for Egrant Scholars Trey Maddox and Caitlin Oden as they present their research on template-directed synthesis for the regulation of gene expression.
All right.
All right. And on Thursday, February 17th, we will be announcing the 2011 Library Research Prize winners and presenting last year's winner with our new Library Research Prize Traveling Trophy. Wow. That's pretty major. Yeah, sounds like a big deal. But today, please help me welcome our Faculty Award winner for Education, Dr. Jay Rasmussen.
Thanks to everyone for being here. I appreciate it. I've got a lot of friends here and some folks I don't know, but thank you so much for being here today. This will be the first part of a 4-part series. Are we getting weird sound right now?
Yeah.
Bob, anything I need to do? Okay.
You're fine.
Kind of the first part of a 4-part series. The total series is really called Strategies for Increasing Student Engagement. And this is really the first segment of that series. We'll be looking at the idea of kind of why, should these strategies be used in any way. Next one will be March 10th then, and we'll be looking at really ways to overcome some of the obstacles, that professors might feel in using strategies to engage students. Sometimes we have to overcome obstacles that students might have, to being engaged in the learning process. And then April 14th, we'll be specifically connecting some strategies with lecture. I think all of us at some point in time do some lecturing. As college professors, we've got a few K-12 people here as well too, but we all do some stand and deliver. So how can we engage in that process as well? And then May 5th, the last one, be looking at really how to connect people with content area text a little bit better, some strategies for that too. So if you enjoyed today, and if you feel like you can put up with me for another session or a few more sessions, please come, and encourage your colleagues to come as well too. That would be great. We're going to be doing some things with partners here today a little bit. Also, we'll do some large group discussion as well too. But I want to start you off just with a partner here, kind of getting comfortable. A lot of you know the person you're sitting next to. I know enough of you to figure this part out. But some of you don't know the person seated next to you. So if you don't have somebody close to you right now that you can talk to, maybe you could just shift a little bit, but kind of figure out who your partner is going to be in some way if you could. Let's do that. Sure.
I'll take Matt. Or you already got someone? You got Bob?
I can get Bob.
I can pull up here by you.
Okay, here's your task. You ready? Let's, in your handout packet, if you could, and this would be kind of the, I guess it's a bluish colored one. Let's turn to the first page there. On top of it, it says quotables there. What I'd like you to do is take a look through. You've got about 4 pages of quotes here. Kind of skim through fairly quickly. And what I'd like you to do is find a quote that you think really best describes, what you think to be true about teaching, and maybe something that you actually do put into practice, occasionally too. So I'd like you to identify that quote that you think best typifies your beliefs, your practices as a teacher. And then I'd like you to share that quote with your partner and tell them what the quote is and then kind of why you picked it. Why is that a reflection of you, as a teacher? Okay? Anybody not clear on that at all?
One more time, Jay?
One more time. Take a quick look through the quotes. You've got about 4 pages of them. Pick one. Just pick one that you think best typifies your beliefs, your practices as a teacher. And then share that with that one other person that you're seated next to. And talk about why you picked that quote. Okay? And introduce yourself, too, if you don't know that person. Start with that. Okay? So let's just begin with that if you could.
I borrow some of these, Jay?
They are yours. Even if you find one that you like a lot before you get through all four, that's fine too. But if you could, fairly soon kind of talk to your partner here.
All right.
We're working with limited time.
Okay. All right. I like this one. Mediocre teacher. There. Good teacher explains. The superior teacher demonstrates. Great teacher. I love growing. I love it. At the end of the day, man, that's what I strive to do. So, you can't go over everything in 3 months. So I'm just trying to push them to take initiative to plant a positive seed in them as they become teachers, to know that the student is more important. You're more important than whatever I'm trying to say. I really do seek to inspire and to empower them, to encourage them. So to be great, there's no great. Because and that's a form of love. Love is also, I think love is also
What about you? I like this necessary limitation. And also smart from experience, being competent, figuring out how to play a role, but also how to be in that role.
Take about another 2 minutes or so. Another 2 minutes.
Plato often gets quoted. Bob's a great teacher, so I'm going to be like that.
Right. And I don't mean to quote something now. I jump into experience who are in some fundamental way and some teacher,
But they don't have a practice.
you really can't even think about it.
So if you don't, I think that's part of the big part of teaching people teaching.
Right. Exactly.
Communicate that excitement. So yes, it's important to learn how to do things.
No question.
It's also important to stop and practice. Think about what talk about asking the questions about what it is.
I guess I have.
Why did that work? Why didn't it work? What made you excited about it? Interested about it? What makes you want to do it again?
Yeah. No, we have to be.
Those are important questions. Why questions? That's good. That's good. Because you
10 days.
We're going to pull back together again if we could here. If I can get your attention. We've gotten a quick start in this first packet that you have, and this is giving us a kind of a quick agenda of what we're going to do in this first session here. And what you'll notice is with each of the topics, for most of them, there's something that's italicized right at the end, and that's a particular activity, that we might be jumping into. So we just did one called quotables. Here in a second, we're going to be involved in an activity just called a simple partner share. We'll do that. And then we'll be in an activity that's called listening teams as well, too. You'll notice after listening teams, there's a number there. It says number 32. That particular number is referencing something that's cited in the green packet that you have. And this is a collection of roughly 70 different strategies that you could consider, to actively engage your student. So throughout the 4, I'll be trying to use a number of the strategies so you can see what they feel like and so forth. But anytime you see a number, it's referencing a particular strategy in this handout. I'm not going to go through how to do these strategies. You'll kind of see some of them, see what they feel like from a student's perspective. But I would really encourage you to keep this near where you do your planning, whether you're a college teacher. We've got a lot of K-12 teachers in here too. But keep it near a place where you do a lot of your planning. And when you're kind of stuck for an idea on how I can get students engaged in some way, you've got a real host of ideas here. We've actually got a group now, it's 77 faculty that are field testers of a lot of these strategies. So a lot of these things are happening, within Bethel at this time. But these are some ones that have proven to be successful, kind of in the trenches. That's where I think they come from. So today I won't be referencing this one much, but it is a resource for you. If you want it online, send me an email. I'd be happy to send it to you. And if you keep coming to the sessions, bring this with you if you could. I don't want to give new ones out every single time we're doing this. So bring it with you if you could. Let's just take a look at really the next area that we're going to move to, which is that idea of really defining what we mean, by engaged learning. So let's just deal with that. I use the term engaged learning. In the research, the term that's used most commonly is active learning. And now we're starting to have a few more people use the term engaged learning. And I'll kind of explain why I like that term better. But, the historical roots of this whole idea of actively engaging people, go back to the definition that we've got here. And you have this in your packet as well. And this is back to 1991, kind of our first thought, about what it means to actively engage learners. And, it's pretty simplistic. It involves students doing things and thinking about what they're doing. Okay, that was kind of some of the first definitional work that was done. The definition I actually like the best right now is really represented best, I think, schematically, versus just words necessarily. And this is a definition that comes from a person named D. Fink. I think it's 2003 or so. And a contrast was drawn between just passive learning, where theoretically the student is sitting there, just taking in, all this great wisdom that we have for them. And boy, they're just soaking everything in. And the contrast is drawn to the idea that, thinking that really our students truly are more active learners. Often they function best when they're not in that passive role. And D. Fink really breaks it up into a couple areas. First of all, there needs to be some type of experience, that the student's having. And that experience can be something that they're doing, for example. Now, that doing could be something they're writing, something they're reading, something they're saying, something they are physically doing. It can even be listening. It can be observing. So there's some type of experience, that student is engaged in. Right now, we have an experience of sorts that's going on. It's kind of changing, by the minute. But then I think the key part that really bears attention is the importance of reflection, on that experience that the student is having. And I really like to kind of focus on the idea of, the student really thinking about what they're learning, how they're learning it, but then also recognizing that the depth of the reflection can really come when it's done individually, but it also can really come when that reflection is done with someone else. So that idea of the active learning, it's not just about the doing of it, but it's also about really the reflection on whatever it is that's happening. Samuel Zelanga wrote just a little while ago on C faculty about interim trips and what are the benefits and what are the kind of pitfalls potentially of interim trips. Talked a lot about that idea for reflection, just how critical that is. So in any event, when we're talking about active learning, when we're talking about engaged learning, this is what I'm really talking about. Okay, it's not just somebody doing something. I mean, there's more to it than that. Okay, I'd like you. Well, let's take a look at this quote real quick here too. And you've got this one in your packet. Why don't you just kind of read through it if you could. Kind of the second part of that concept then is the idea of really that reflection alone and then with others. Why don't you take a look at this one too, if you would. Again, that's in your packet as well. So I'd like us to think about if this really rings true with real experience, okay, with your experiences. So let's think about that a little bit. What I'd like you to do is think about what I'm just calling a significant learning event in your life. Okay, think of a time in your life when you were just, it was powerful. There was just, you could just feel almost, some real learning taking place. And then I'd like you to talk with your partner a little bit about how were you engaged at that time? Was it reading? Was it writing? Was it speaking? Was it doing something? What was it? Think about how you were engaged. Then I'd like you to talk a little bit about what kind of reflection may have been connected to that. And think, was there a lone reflection? Was there reflection with others? Let's give you an example of this. If I were to take, just for myself, probably the most powerful learning time for me was a time that I received a Fulbright Award to conduct research in Norway at the University of Oslo. So for 6 months, I literally moved my entire family to Oslo, Norway. I had a third-grade son who was put in Norwegian schools, didn't speak Norwegian, had an 8th-grade daughter who was put in middle school, Norwegian school, didn't speak Norwegian. My wife, who's Mexican-American, is now moving to Norway, for 6 months. Okay, this was a major learning experience for us on every possible, in every possible way, culturally and otherwise. We had, our learning event was 24 hours a day. It was like everything we did. We were immersed in this learning event. We were engaged. We did a lot of thinking, reflecting alone. My daughter would sit in her room and think about what's going on here. My son, and I would as well. But often, both Roberta and I and our kids actually felt that we didn't really fully appreciate that experience, get everything we could out of that experience until after it was completely over. We were back in the United States, and we wound up talking to some other people that had lived in Norway. We just started sharing experiences about the culture and university life and some of those kind of things. So for me, anyhow, major engagement, there was that kind of alone, that other component as well, too. But for you, if you could identify a time when you felt just like, man, there's a lot of learning that's taking place here. If you could talk to that same partner, kind of describe that a little bit, and then talk about that role of reflection. Was it really there, that alone part and that with somebody else? Okay? So when you're ready, why don't you go ahead and talk with your partner. Okay. Anybody need a partner still here at all? Get you over there.
When I was in college, studying
Okay. Yeah, I was trying to think of it.
What you're doing is safe and right. I'm just following you around.
I don't know where I'm going.
That's all. Just do it. Don't worry about the camera.
Oh, wow.
And it was, there were elements of obviously reading in here, like, journal. So I wrote things down.
That's reflection.
I reflected in the journal, but then of course she and I had some shared experiences. So that seems to me as an example where there's a nice synergy between you by yourself.
But you always did it.
And then of course your own view of what you're learning changes. You reflect on a day together. So here's kind of what I got out of it. Here's what I got out of it. Oh, I hadn't really thought of it that way.
Learning about that.
So that's great. My own writing, I'm doing a little bit of memoir writing. And I'm surprised what I remember is I wrote about wood violence in my time. It was kind of all I discovered it was pretty negative. But then I learned about writing and a lot of positive yeah, you discover what you know, you discover what you think.
Say, why did I fit that route? Was that really, is that really the way it goes? But now, an academic space for me is definitely but I'm doing this because I thought I was really good. I I just want to and I think I did a good enough job.
That's amazing. You were like one. That's like
I wrote a paper and I then
oh yeah.
so obviously learning that was both a lot of time and then also think about
because we would have like today it's kind of framed.
I mean, the most basic question you would ask at the beginning right or near your graduate student.
But if you watch the video,
that was really significant.
Think about another minute or so if you could.
What's my point here? What's your name? Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Oh, you just said all this.
That's like thesis where they should think like motivating.
And what's in it, what's not in it, yeah, should be thrown away. Which other thing I think what you take out. And sometimes
Oh yeah.
I've recently gone to writing.
Let's pull back together again if you could. If I can get your attention here. What I'd like to do is hear just in a couple words what some of your points of engagement were during that learning experience. Let's just hear from a bunch of people, just in a couple words, what was your engagement? Let's talk about that. Somebody to start us real quick. Was a lot of reading that took place? Was a lot of, whatever. Let's hear some of the engagement areas.
For all three of us, it was experience.
Okay.
I think an experience we had.
Yep.
It was we was somewhat sustained, and it was somewhat surprising.
Okay, let's get some more out here. Let's just lay out a bunch of them. Somebody go.
Actual patient care and clinical situation.
More of an experience-based kind of thing as well. Okay, let's keep going.
Ours were also experience.
Okay, there's 3 for experience. Now, interesting. Okay, how about some others?
Ours were cultural experiences, whether that's living in a different place,
Yeah.
or in my case it was being in music school, which is kind of an immersion experience.
Yep. Okay, how about some others? Does anybody have anything different than an experience? This is really interesting.
grad school and learning new information and discovered that if it was really, really new with no prior knowledge, don't do it in summer school because I didn't have enough time for my brain to really process.
Especially that reflection takes time, obviously, too. Yep. The engagement can look a lot of different ways. Experiences obviously are powerful, because not for a variety of reasons, but there's a lot of emotions connected typically, and that really can add some power, I think, to the learning experience as well, too. Okay, so that idea then, when we're talking about engagement, we're really talking about kind of a variety of ways, but also just that reflection piece, kind of alone, and with somebody else. I'm just curious if you can just raise your hand. How many felt that there was added depth that came to it with that reflecting with somebody else? Okay, right. A few folks, it was pretty much yourself, but oftentimes when there's someone else involved, that reflection was more powerful. Okay, interesting. Okay, well let's do this. I want to consider really the main question for the day, which is this one: why even consider engaged learning, as an instructional tool? And what we're going to do with this is I'm going to break you up into what I call listening teams, and I'm going to do a little stand and deliver here for a while. Okay, I'm going to do a little bit of a lecture, but I'm going to break you into some 3 different listening teams, and we're going to have one group that we're just going to call the agreeers. And you're going to listen pretty careful to what I have to say, and there'll be some overheads here and so forth. And I want you to find something that you buy into. Okay, this rings true, with your experience. And let's have this group over here be our agreeers. Okay, so you have to find something that you buy into. Then we're going to have another group of people. We're going to call you the naysayers. Okay, you've got to find something that it's bogus. This Rasmussen guy does not know what he's talking about. This is just messed up. Okay, so we're going to have our naysayers. I'm going to start here, go to Kent, and then we'll go back. And you guys are in this game too. You don't get out of it just by standing there. All right. So you're gonna be the naysayers then. All right. And then the other folks, starting with Deb here, going over. I'd like you to think of examples in some way that connect, to what we're taking a look at here. All right. So we've got our agreeers over here, we've got our naysayers over here, and we've got our example givers over here. Okay, I am going to stand and deliver for a little bit. So as you're kind of working through this, as you're thinking about it, kind of consider your role, obviously, something you're agreeing with and so forth. But just, at this point, just try to wrestle with it, with the content. Then we're going to start here with some thoughts then, too. All right? The basic model that I'm going to talk about is the information processing model. And I'm going to use this, as a model that I think explains pretty well how we as humans learn. All right? And there's different names for this model. This model dates back actually to 1954, believe it or not. A guy named William Nesser wrote a book called Cognitive Psychology. He proposed this model at that point, and since then researchers have been adding bits and pieces, to what he had to say. I think the model still holds up pretty well, even at this time. Within this model, there are some basic ideas that are held. And one of them would be the idea that learning is an active process. Okay, it's not just that passive thing where we thought we were just infusing all this information. But we're finding the greater, they call it the depth of processing, the greater the depth of processing, the more learning, really takes place. That's a basic idea, fundamental to the model. Also the idea that we as humans use reasoning in the learning process. When we hear something, when we experience something, we try to make sense of it. We try to make sense of it. And often when we don't make sense of it, it's not just working with us, we wrestle with it. That's cognitive dissonance. You've heard that. We're just thinking about it. We're just, how does this fit? We try to make sense of our world. That's how God has created us. Another basic idea is that prior knowledge is key. Plato said we learn nothing new independent of what we already know. Okay? And in a sense, what we know is built, on the foundation of something. Okay? It's not just new learning, void, of connections, to something in the past. I'm sure you've had experiences, too, where you've tried to teach students something new. That prior knowledge wasn't there. That foundation wasn't there. And it's really difficult. It's like trying to build the second floor of your house and you don't have the first floor finished. So we're finding that prior knowledge is key. We're also finding that if there's improper prior knowledge, something's learned wrong the first time, it takes a long time for somebody to relearn that. But we need to know is that prior knowledge there before we can really move forward. And then the basic idea that there really are some steps that we go through when we're learning something. And that's really what the information processing model is. And you've got this slides in your handout packet. And basically what the model talks about is that during the learning experience, there's some type of environment, that the student's going to be in. This is our environment right now. Okay, we're kind of in the middle of the library, got all kinds of things going on. But this is our environment, one way or the other. Within that environment, there's stimuli. There's certain things you see, certain things you hear. Fortunately, certain things we can smell, over here as well, too. But there's stimuli in whatever that environment it is. Doesn't matter where you are. And then our receptors are taking in, whatever the stimuli are in that given environment. And that's done through our sensory registers. And our sensory registers, what they say is that everything that we take in, we actually have total recall of for about a quarter of a second. Okay? About a quarter of a second. And then most of what we took in is gone after that, is lost. But occasionally we do hold on to something, that we actually take in. And then the part I want to talk maybe the most about is that idea of short-term memory, sometimes called working memory, as well too, and then long-term memory. Short-term memory, and you've all heard things about this, but it's actually good for holding, they say roughly about 7 pieces of information at any point in time. And that's kind of plus or minus 2. All right? You got a few people that are a little more on the 9 range. You got a few more people on the 5 range, but somewhere around there. And typically, whatever's in short-term memory is good for about 18 to 36 hours, is what they say. So not real long, So it sounds like short-term memory isn't like very good. It's kind of worthless. It doesn't hold a whole lot of information. But the function, one of the functions of short-term memory is that it really, at times, really is involved in the process of things getting shifted to long-term memory. So ideally, what will happen is things in short-term memory make that shift over to long-term memory. Unfortunately, a lot of times things are just kind of lost, don't make that shift. But it is short-term memory then that really kind of helps us make decisions. It's really what leads to us having some kind of motor response, to kind of doing something, saying something, and so forth. So it's incredibly inefficient in terms of a storage area, but it's particularly helpful because of the role it plays in connecting things to long-term memory, decision-making, that type of thing. The start of semesters, I really don't like them very much because I feel overloaded, as a professor. And it's mostly because I'm trying to juggle names, a lot of names, in my short-term memory. And it's very difficult to do. So I'm sure some of you sometimes feel like, man, I can't get anything more in my short-term memory. And you know what? You're right. I mean, that's a legitimate excuse. It just doesn't hold a lot of things, in the short term. Okay, what I want to talk about the most, though, is how we get things really to long-term memory. Okay, and I'm going to, well, first of all, long-term memory, there are kind of different structures that are connected with it. We've really got a declarative, a procedural, and more imagery. And just real quick what these are. So long-term memory, you've got kind of facts, generalized information. You've got concepts, principles. These are all things that you have in long-term memory. Then you have an episodic memory. Okay? You can kind of see what that's involved. Often for something to make it to episodic memory, in a sense, it can sometimes be a very brief experience, but often there's a lot of emotion connected to it. Any kind of trauma situations. It may have taken place in 5 seconds, but because of the power of emotion, it's like there, forever, in a sense. And then we have a procedural memory. Okay, you have that. Great thing to have. And then you also have an imagery. Okay, it's just the remembering of pictures or images that would be there. Okay. This will be kind of my take on this a little bit based on a bunch of research, and then I am going to show you some specific research too. The odds of really getting something over to long-term memory increase dramatically when, first of all, the students are seeing the meaningfulness of that information. Okay. And what we're finding is that when students don't see the meaning in what they're doing, they just don't tend to take it in. They just aren't taking it, aren't absorbing it as quickly. Anytime there's meaningful repetition, it's incorporated. And notice that I say meaningful, not just repetition. If you do the same thing over and over and over with your students in the same way, not going to have the impact as if you've got meaningful repetition. It's a little different. We're coming at this a little differently each time. But it's still the same content that we're dealing with. And also when information is chunked, okay, when it's stored, our brain stores information in networks. And when students are seeing information presented in a coherent way where the relationships are clear, perhaps it's a visual aid of some sort, but when they're seeing the relationships, when it's chunked, okay, our brain's a lot more efficient at really storing that information. For example, if I tell you, remember the numbers 1940, 1945, right? If you remember that by isolated little digits, probably pretty tricky. If I tell you, remember kind of the start of World War II, the end of World War II, all of a sudden 1940, 1945 becomes a whole lot easier, because things are chunked, they're connected together in some way. And then also, a lot of recent research on this, just the value of emotion and how critical that is in the learning process. And I love that quote. And by the way, it's not just any emotion. Okay, you can bring fear into your classroom. You can bring intimidation into your classroom. And there's emotions connected to that. Those are going to be counterproductive, by the way. But generally speaking, emotions that aren't negative in a sense, do really help in that learning process. And then the idea of, it's just called dual coding, the idea that when students are getting information verbally and visually, you're really, in a sense, doubling the likelihood of things really making it to long-term memory. Because you're making use of the full brain at that point. There's not as much overload, on short-term memory. Okay? And then just a couple things real quick, and then we're going to hear your thoughts. these ideas come out of a book that we've got. I think we have this one up. Yeah, we actually have this book here in the library. A couple books I'm recommending. And these will reinforce a little bit of what I was just talking about as well. Collaborative rehearsal, where the connections are made with the information. This is in your handout too. Again, when the students are seeing relevance. And motivation, really key. And believe it or not, we as instructors play a pretty big role in that motivation level of students. You can actually get students interested in something they may not naturally be interested in, just by catching, whatever emotion you bring, excitement you bring about something. When they're actively engaged, they're receiving material multiple times, but in different ways, kind of like I was talking about, not just the same thing over and over again. More. This one's interesting. Pretty recent research on this. Just showing the value of testing. Students testing themselves even. The whole emotion thing we were just talking about. And this one's really interesting too. Often that relationship with the teacher is particularly critical. And we're finding, especially students of color and women, that relationship with the teacher is really critical. Okay, I'm going to shoot ahead just a little bit here if I could. Let's jump on this a little bit here. We're fighting time here in a lot of ways, but I'd like, if we could, let's just hear kind of 3 chunks of information here. If we could, kind of our agreeers, our disagreeers, our example givers. So let's. I know I'm putting you on the spot fast here to be thinking. But how about something that you kind of bought into this group over here? Something that just kind of rang true in with you.
One of the last things you just said about emotion evokes or increases interest, or it may make a student care about the information depending upon how your excitement or how you approach the information. Sometimes it spills onto them.
Okay. How about other areas of agreement? I've given you like 30 seconds to reflect on this stuff. But, how about some other things you'd agree with, Donna?
Well, how the short-term memory actually is, because I liked your quote from Plato, and I didn't get it written down before it was gone.
Yeah. We learn nothing new independent of what we already know. So, yeah. Okay, other things you agree with?
The need to encourage meaning making in students.
Yeah. Yeah. What I found, too, is that particularly that needs to come pretty early in your lesson, whatever you're doing on a given day, because otherwise they're checking out. And just my opinion right now is I think students are even more and more practical. If they don't see how they can use this in some way, they are not fully with you often. A few students will be, because they think you're smart, you're the teacher, I better listen. But an awful lot of them, unless they're sold on the meaning and purpose of what's happening, they're not fully there. They're really critical. Okay? All right, let's hear from our naysayers if we could. We've got kind of folks over here. Anything that you just don't buy into in some way?
I don't buy into the whole thing about active learning, I'm sorry, but years ago I interviewed some English majors in college. I hope you know I'm doing my role
I
here.
believe you. I
And education majors, and asked how they liked to learn. And the English majors wanted to sit there and take notes on the information that was delivered to them, and the education students wanted to work it out. So I don't think this is right for everybody, right, Sheila?
I can't find enough things to disagree with. That's my problem.
It's, yeah, Kemp?
I take a great risk in disagreeing with Plato, but can't we learn new things even if we don't already know something? Where's the role for imagination? What if something really captures our imagination, even if we don't already know it? If the right stimulus is there, wouldn't we be inspired to learn it?
Even though we know absolutely nothing about it, have no foundation for it. Yeah. Good thought. Yep, Lotta.
Aren't you perpetuating stereotypes of students of color, and they need to have that interaction with?
Okay. Fortunately, I know all of you, so I kind of know what you're thinking behind some of these comments, which is good, but yeah.
And I would say with that interaction with students of color that's really considered a privilege because there haven't, in our history, there haven't been as many teachers and professors of color, and they have still had to exceed and do well, regardless of who's standing in front of them.
I agree.
Good thought.
You're in the wrong seat.
You have a very vocal disagreement. I'm noticing that right now. Okay. Yeah.
I do have one serious and one scribble. It's World War II, 1940. That was 1939.
Okay. You got me. Yeah.
No, but a little danger in making meaning. Is there a danger in having the professor guide too much on the meaning that's made, so that the students merely parrot the meaning that the professor has already seen?
Yeah, I think the whole meaning-making process, I go at it 3 different ways. The first way I usually go at it is asking them, here's what we're working on today. How in the world can you use this? When could you use this? How could you use this? So I really work pretty hard to pull it out of them as much as I possibly can, and then I'll slip little things in here and there. I think that's really critical that they wrestle with it in some way. At times I'll share personal experiences, how I might have used something in some way. But often even at the end of lessons, I'll come back and say, we just worked on all of this today. I hope it was interesting for you. But how can you use this in some way? Where is it going to be? So I'm agreeing with your disagreeing. I think it's best coming from them, for sure. Yeah. Okay, Carol?
I just wondered about your premise that it's inherent to humans to use reasoning or choose to use reasoning process. If you look at choices about going to war or elections or whatever, you just wonder if that's inherently how people approach thinking about things.
Yeah, good point. I'm not supposed to agree with these disagrees, but that's a good point. All right, how about some examples then? Just something that, how about in your life, your experiences as teachers or as people, that just rings true in what we're saying? Yeah, yes?
Well, I think focusing on a lot of times, but intercultural competence or things like that. A lot of times you have to first establish that this is a personal topic, and sometimes there's things that there's conceptions about what this is about that students will just kind of write that off. And so more of the same. So you have to kind of get through that and establish there's some meaning that's relevant before they learn.
Yeah, good point. Other examples? Yes, please.
I myself was just in middle school over J term, and the emotion, it really does play a huge thing. The teacher's emotion for the day, it totally plays off onto the students, and how, just being aware of that and how you are acting and pushing yourself is very important to for all.
Let's get one more if we could here. I really want to respect the time if we could. But yeah.
On the first day of class, you talked about not knowing students.
Yeah.
And I know what finally makes it work for me is if I'm handing something back and I'm walking around the room and handing it to them and putting the face with the name, then it finally sticks. And until then, it doesn't.
Yeah. You've got to use it. You've got to use that knowledge, to really have it stick. Yeah. Okay, I do want to wrap it up. We're right about at the time right now. What I'm hoping is, what we were just talking about, I hope you keep thinking about it, okay? So I hope it kind of haunts you a little bit and keep reflecting on it. 40 minutes feels like a joke to me almost, but it is what we have. So hopefully it got you started on some thinking a little bit too. The other handout that you have with the strategies, like I said, put that near where you do your planning. And if you ever find yourself in a situation where you feel like they're going to be talking really long without them doing too much, that's often a really good place to try to bring some way to engage them in. So I think it's really helpful that way too. And then hopefully you can make it back to the other sessions. This is what we've got lined up. Invite some of your colleagues to come as well too. I'll present a little information next time, but we're going to mostly work with things you've experienced. I'm preaching to the choir here, obviously, with this kind of a topic, but I just want us to really wrestle with what a lot of those obstacles are for you, but also for your students, because you have many of them that really don't want to engage much. They prefer just to kind of sit there, like a bump on the log. And what do you kind of do with some of that? So we'll work with that too. Okay, so thank you very much.